Greetings, Osio, Iodaza. Welcome to the Red Road East. I'm your host, Fierce Truth Seeker. Well, today we're going to have a guest who has been on the show before, and we're going to talk about a very serious topic. Okay? History has painted the narrative that there are no survivors of the American Holocaust on the East Coast, and that the only legitimate nations, indigenous nations, are those of the Great Plains or located out west. As a matter of fact, a lot of people don't know the first reservations were on the East Coast. Many of us suffered paper genocide and things of that nature. And also, not all quote unquote Indians relocated out west on the Trail of Tears, etc. So today, we're going to have a guest who's going to address a lot of these issues. And we welcome back again TurtleGang Francis Norris. TurtleGang, how
Peace.
is it going, my
Gunta
brother?
Walking. Let me say, Wella Gunta Walking, Ona Gunta Walking. That means peace and blessing. Uh, Intuensi, Top Coat, Lenatuee, Nita Pukuwanku. So basically, told you my name is Turtle, still Turtle. Um, my clan, I'm from the Turtle Clan, i.e. Turtle Gang. It's a reflection of my ancestral heritage, just presented in a modern form. So I want to say thank you for having me on here again, and
Oh, you're welcome, bro. It's
appreciate you,
been a
brother.
while.
Yeah, it's been a minute. Been a minute.
so, so for those who didn't see the first show, let everyone know your tribal affiliations, who you are, a little bit of background about yourself.
Okay, so I come from a family who we are direct descendants of the Lenni Lenape and Cherokee that settled in the area. Um, we've been here like on record, documented like paperwork. We can trace our family in the present, our presence in the area back to the 1600s, well before French and Indian wars. A lot of things going on that tie our family into what was going on. But yeah, I'm a descendant of the Reeves. I'm a descendant of the Richardsons, of the Rocks. And these are all well-known Lenape and Cherokee families in Monmouth County, New Jersey. Um, I am a blood descendant of the Sandhill Lenape and Cherokee, found in Monmouth County, New Jersey, and I am a member of the Onondaga Northeastern Band of Cherokee and Lenape, which is also in New York and New Jersey. So, my family has a long history tying us into, like I said, our Lenape ancestors. We've celebrated in our local areas, and we just decided at some point, the younger ones in the family decided was that, we've done hiding, and we wanted to come out and announce ourselves and make relationships with our long lost family members. So that's where we at right now in 2021.
Okay. And so our topic for today is facts and fiction regarding
Yes.
the tribes or nations of the East Coast. And
Yes.
so for the viewers, why is it important for people to understand the difference between indigenous nations of the East Coast and those of the West and or Great Plains?
Well, for the simple fact that although we share similar cultures, we're very different people. You know what I mean? You have to understand the actual history that took place in North America, um, to understand how where things have gotten to at this point. But the primary difference between us on the east and us on the west, we are first contact nations that encountered European expansion and settlement in the 15 and 1600s, the tribes to the the plains tribes and the western tribes, they didn't encounter European settlers until almost 200 years later. You know what I mean? So the impact that it had on all of our respective tribes is very different. And once we get into things a little bit more, people have a better understanding. But the primary difference is the time in which we encounter Europeans and the amount of time we spent with Europeans approaching the 19th century, and how it affected us as tribes. You know what I mean? As opposed to how they were affected much later in the 1800s, early 1900s.
Okay.
So
Now,
I'm okay.
yeah.
But
Um.
tradition wise, there's not a big difference. We all share similar cultures, similar traditions. You know what I mean? It's just as a result of who we've encountered for 200 years, you know, a lot of us appear to be different, even typically.
Right. Now, what role would you say has Hollywood played in the shaping of the perception of who is an American Indian, if you
Okay,
will?
so this is kind of what I was kind of leading into with the last question. So it's yeah, Hollywood played a big role, but what played the largest role was the advent of the of photography. You know what I mean? Being able to
Yeah.
actually take photographs. Now, when and as I spoke earlier, the eastern tribes, we encountered European settlers and colonists 1500s, 1600s, 1700s, right? So by the time you have the invent of the camera, you know, talking about the 1800s, early 1900s, right? So a lot of the recordings of the Eastern tribes are primarily in paintings, right? As opposed to photographs. Now, a lot of the initial photographs and film of Native Americans took place after the development, obviously, of photographic equipment and film equipment. So at that point, those of us here on the East had been amalgamating for almost 200 years. You know what I mean? So by the time they started moving west in 1800s, 17, 1800s, with the development of camera equipment, they're now able to take pictures of the Indians they encountered. So these are all the famous photographs that we see that set the standard for what Indians look like. You know, had cameras been available when they first arrived in the 15, 1600s, we have pictures to show you of what the Eastern tribal nations look like. You know what I mean? And you will see that there's a slight difference in our appearance, and that primarily has to do with who we intermix with, the fact that we're on the East Coast, right, which allows us to do trade with nations that came as far as Europe and Africa, and this is prior to even what we call colonization in the 1500s. So just based primarily on location, we appear very different. And then when you add the fact that they are now able to take pictures of these Western tribes and promote them as such, we have we have photographs and we have things of that nature that allow them to give a very specific reflection of who they are. So Hollywood is an extension of obviously photography and film and all that. So when Hollywood started to make these films, obviously they were utilizing Western tribal members, Western tribes, and this is why we have this appearance of Native Americans appearing to only look a certain way. And that just has to do with basically the invention of the camera and when they were able to record these type of images. So
Yeah.
I wouldn't solely blame it on Hollywood, although they promoted it, but it had a lot to do with timing.
hmm Now, how would one Can you give a couple of examples of how one would, for the viewers? I know we know, but um, how one would distinguish um, an Amerindian, if you will, from out west, from those of the East Coast.
Okay, well,
Typically and also culturally.
okay, so once again, all, people have to understand that those of us on the East began to amalgamate as early as the 1600s, right? We began to intermix with Europeans, with Africans, right? So you got 200 years leading up to 1776, early 1800s, when the United States was developed and formed. You had 200 years of us intermixing and amalgamating with people from all over the planet. So at some point, our appearances began to change. Like if you go back 5 generations, my ancestors did not look the way I look, but uh, that does not disconnect me from their heritage. You know what I mean? It just has a lot to do with the fact that we're on the eastern coast, right? And you're going to find the same things happening on the west coast, right? Whereas the tribes that were situated more in the center of the country, they did not amalgamate as much, and they did not come into contact with different nations until the late 1800s. So they were more so able to retain, their phenotypic look and things of that nature. But us over here on the east and probably on the west, we're more what you would call biracial or interracial or whatever. But what we maintained was the culture, because you have to understand that culture is predicated on the environment you live in, right? The clothing you wear, the type of food you eat, how you express yourself, how you know what I mean? These are all reflective of your environment. You know what I mean? So when we talk about culture, we were able to retain a lot of our cultural aspects. And when I say that, I mean the farming, you know what I mean? I'm saying being able to gather at our ancient sacred sites. We were able to retain a lot of those things, but part of the trade-off was, in order for us to stay here, we had to kind of go underground. We had to hide our culture, right? We couldn't speak our language. We identified as Negro for those of us who were phenotypically closer to Negro, and for those of us that were closer to Europeans, they would identify as white. You know what I mean? We moved into different neighborhoods based on segregation and things of that nature. Because you understand that us being Native and Indigenous Americans, we went through everything that every other person of color went through here in America. You know what I mean? We went through it a lot of times before others did, and we were able to catch on to what was going on. So a lot of us took on the identity of Negro or colored and this and that long before even when they started to put a lot of people in slavery. When they started to bring slaves over, we had already started to identify and amalgamate, you know what I mean? Because that's what preserved us and allowed us to continue to live, and for some of us saved our lives. So there's going to be a very big difference in how we appear just because of the historical accounts that happen. But when you look at the cultures, right, you're going to see that the cultures on the East, on the West, the Midwest, with the exception of the foods we ate and what we lived in. Over here, we lived in wigwams. You know what I mean? Uh, the Plains tribes, who were more nomadic, they lived in teepees. You know what I'm saying? The southwestern tribes, they had pueblos. Whatever the environment determined is how culture was reflected. But the basic tenets of our cultures are all the same. And this is how we can identify each other. We had a sister come from a Western tribe, and she came out East. And first thing she noticed was that we don't look so much like them. But once we got into the ceremony and the dances, she realized, oh yeah, this is our people, because it's not always how you look, right? It's the culture you reflect. You know what I mean? So these are things that less educated people probably might not be able to recognize, because they're just looking at the overt, the external, the phenotypical way we look. You know what I mean?
Okay. Now, this is for the viewers. is there an, because I know, well, not is, I know there is a lot of times a big disconnect
Mm-hmm.
um, with those out west and those of us here on the East Coast. Um, what would you say can account for that disconnect? 'Cause a lot of them out there say, well, we don't know anything about, you guys over here in the East. We didn't know,
Mm-hmm.
even know that y'all were exist, or they think that, um, all the natives were extinct. I'm saying natives loosely,
Mm-hmm.
extinct over here. Can you touch on that a little bit, and and touch on
Yeah.
the fact, I know that there is, sometimes, well, there's also sometimes a level of colorism also.
Mm-hmm.
Can you
That
speak
plays a
on
part
those
in it.
things?
Yeah. Well, first thing I want to do, I want to give you an example, just from a natural, just a human perspective that everybody can relate to. All right. So growing up, you have parents that have close friends, right? You might not be close friends with your mother's best friend's kids. You might be. You might have never met them, right? That's
Mm-hmm.
because you're meeting people who you didn't know you had a connection to. But until you start to talk to them, you're like, oh, my mother and your mother was best friends. Or my grandmother and your grandmother used to live on the same block. And now y'all start sharing some of the same stories, right? Those two individuals, without the connection of the elders, would never have known that they were connected in any way, right?
Mm-hmm.
So what I'm saying is a lot of the issues we have with the tribes in the West are coming from the younger members of these tribes, right? Who haven't sat with their elders, right? Because my elders, right, and I'm 50 years old, my elders have relationships with the elders in Oklahoma, in Canada, right? But what you have is you have the youth who are coming from a very disinterested perspective. You know what I'm saying? They're not, they're just living their lives. You know what I'm saying? They're caught up into all the things that society has to give to them. Then at some point, they start to take pride in their identity, right? So now they start to
Mm-hmm.
get into the culture and they start to sit with the elders, right? So now that they're getting into their culture and sitting with the elders, they've missed a whole education. So now they
Mm-hmm.
come across those of us on the East and they're looking at us, just playing the eye test, what he looks like, and then they want to get at us saying we're not this. But if they would have taken the time to sit with their elders, the elders would have told them, oh yeah, we know exactly who those people are. So whenever I get attacked or I get somebody coming at me trying to express this, I ask them who their elders are and who have they spoken to. You know what I mean? I ask to speak to elders because it's a lot of times it's just the youth. And when I say youth, I don't mean 7, 8 year olds. They could be in their 20s, in their 30s. They just immature, right? And they haven't taken the time to do the proper research to see if what we're saying over here is true. You know what I mean? So these, from my personal experiences, and I'll give you an example. It's an individual now that is trying to discredit all of us on the East. And he's claiming a certain Lenape tribe in Oklahoma, right? But what he doesn't know is I have pictures of my chief with a former Oklahoma chief going back to the 80s. And they're
Mm.
together. And they counsel
Wow.
with each other. And my chief used to visit out to Oklahoma in the 80s, in the 80s. The chief, my chief is Taliona, Chief Taliona. You know Taliona, right? Have you met my chief?
I've met him before.
Darius Two Bears Ross. So he has a picture with him and Chief Frenchie from Oklahoma. Now, if you're familiar with who Chief Frenchie is, he's official. Right? He's passed, rest in peace to the elder. You know what I mean? But the youth that are out there now trying to start issues don't know that we already connected. We already know we're family. You know what I mean? Another one of my elders who has passed, Lone Bear Reevy. Lone Bear Reevy, his image and his story appears in the Delaware Nation's historical accounts. You know what I'm saying? So when people attack me or attack those up on the East, a lot of it comes from just sheer ignorance and not having the facts. And why don't they have the facts? Because they haven't been sitting under their elders.
Mm.
That's why we over here aren't attacking them. We only defend ourselves. You know what I
Mm.
mean? But we sit up under our elders. You know what I
True.
mean? Like I said, I'm 50 years old. This same I've experienced this like almost like 3 times in my life now from a
Mm.
different generation who now comes into their own and then looks at us and wants to deny us of who we are based strictly on our appearance. You know what I mean? But it just shows to me that they haven't done any due diligence. They haven't sat with their elders and they haven't asked their elders these questions. Because if they did, a lot of these issues that we are having right now that we had 15 years ago, that we had 30 years ago, right, wouldn't be happening.
Mm-hmm.
So I blame it more on ignorance than anything else. Ignorance and
Mm.
arrogance.
Ignorance and arrogance.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because also you have those who, you see they have like an air of superiority because they may be those who live on a reservation
Mm-hmm.
or have tribal, federal recognition. You know,
Mm-hmm.
what can you say about that? Do you feel that that is something important to be on a reservation or federally recognized
Well, I'm gonna tell you
in
something my
terms of
uncle told.
identity?
Yeah. Well, one thing my uncle told me, told all of us, he was like, and this is not to disparage anybody who lives on reservations, but he said real Indians don't live on reservations. You know what I mean? We have no
Mm.
borders. We have no boundaries. I mean, so we know that reservations and all these things came about because of colonization, right? We know the tribes that were recognized by the federal government are merely the portion of the greater nation that decided to side with the US government, right? That's
Mm-hmm.
so like for people who don't understand what recognize really means, I would ask them to really do some research and find out what it means. It just means that they're recognized by the United States government, and the United States government gives them money. That's all it means. It doesn't mean you're not Indian. It means the United States government is in good standings with your tribe. Y'all made agreements, and they honor those agreements. For those of us who are not recognized, that's primarily because our tribes didn't enter into any agreements with them during the time of colonization. We fought back. You understand? We didn't want to assimilate or we didn't want to leave our homelands. Like my family situation, we didn't want to leave our homeland. We had farms, we had communities. We didn't want to leave. So we stayed, right? We could have left and been recognized with everybody else, but we didn't. We stayed. We first went to Brotherton, which was the first reservation on the East Coast, first reservation in United States history. Now we know there's reservations that existed before in Virginia, but that was before the advent of the United States. I'm talking the first reservation in United States history was in New Jersey. Okay. My family, my ancestors were on that. Because of conditions on those reservations, we left those reservations and migrated back into our where we traditionally were living, right? And I had a nice little breakdown set up for you where I was going to show you everything, but obviously I'm at work, I can't show it, but I can
Mm.
show you the creations. I can show you when Brotherton was officially shut down, and I can show you all these Indian towns in New Jersey springing up within a 2 or 3 year span of Brotherton shutting down.
Mm.
Town would be one of them. And if you look on a map, Town and Brotherton is about a day's walk from each other. You know what I
Mm.
mean? So we have a lot of like a lot of our history here on the East has been suppressed. It's been suppressed. People, even our cousins in the West, don't know because the history that they hang on to is their particular historic path. So in 1779, when they signed the Treaty of Fort Pitt, right, which was the preserved land in the Ohio, Pennsylvania and Ohio region, they tell their story from that perspective. They
Mm-hmm.
can't tell the story of those of us who stayed back on the East because they weren't here, right? So our stories slightly diverge, right?
Can you speak on also? We have like 3 minutes left.
Mhm.
Can you speak a little bit on paper genocide?
Okay,
How that
so
plays into it as well?
yeah, so everything we've been talking about is genocide, and how is it reflected was reflected through the paperwork, right? Primarily, in order for us to keep our lands, right, our farms, we had to identify something other than what we were, right? And this is where paper genocide comes from. We started to identify ourselves as Negro, colored, whatever it was that allowed us to stay in our territories and maintain our farms. You also have Walter Plecker, who started to reassign certain families, right, primarily in Virginia, reassigning them their identities in terms of using the local censuses and things of that nature. So,
Mm-hmm.
it's basically just on paper, they classified as something other than we were. Like we all have nationalities. They stripped us of our nationalities and started to identify us as Negro, Black, colored, on up to African American now. That's paper genocide. So anybody that has any of those things attached to their identity, they suffer from paper genocide.
Yeah. Um, well, man, I wish we could build some more, man. It's always a pleasure, bro.
Absolutely, bro.
And
Thank you
I
for
know
having
you.
me.
Yeah, yeah. Anytime, and you know, you always have a home here at the Red Road East, brother. You know,
Got you.
and anytime you have anything that you want to talk about, just reach out to me. And it's not a problem. You know,
Got you. All right.
and I know you're at work, so I know you got to
Yeah,
get back on the job, man. I appreciate your time.
absolutely, bro. Thank you for having me again, and we'll talk real soon. All right, bro?
Sounds good, man.
All right.
Okay, take care.
Y'all are going to walking. Peace.
All right, Donada.
Do trees tell each other stories?
I'm sorry. I'm afraid I don't know that.
Hey, why don't we go find out? Listen.